So 2/3 of the world's biodiversity is found in the tropics. So I want to take you somewhere that's really warm and steamy. But ironically, the majority of the people studying this biodiversity is found in the cold temperate places like here. And much of this biodiversity is threatened. So the blue-eyed black lemur from Madagascar is endangered. It's only found in a few places. And the Togo slippery frog is only found in Togo in Ghana. And we know that a lot of the reasons for these threats are habitat loss. So you can see Mount Mulanje there in Malawi. There's a little bit of forest just clinging on there. But we also know that nature provides us lots of benefits. So these forests are important for climate mitigation, not just globally, but actually locally. The lemurs attract tourists. We heard about the importance of tourism from Professor Leakey. And even the uncharismatic fauna, such as the slippery frog, is a really important indicator for wetland health. And we also know that nature provides lots and lots of benefits. So this bat here is really important for pest control in agricultural landscapes. And that's why the Tropical Biology Association started. So we wanted to work with this amazing potential of the people in the countries where this biodiversity is being threatened. And we've been doing it by designing courses, field courses and tailor-made courses that are giving these conservationists the skills that they tell us they need. So the skills and the expertise that perhaps they're not getting from their university training. But the other thing we've learned about capacity building is rather than doing training in a bubble, is if you integrate it with research and with conservation, then it makes it relevant and it makes it applicable. And people do need to be able to apply their new skills. And that's why, thirdly, we provide follow-up support afterwards. So once you've come on a TBA course, you're in our family, whether you like it or not, for the rest of your career. So our field courses take people out into the very habitats that we want to conserve. And I'm sure you'd all agree that the best way to learn anything is through hands-on experience. And I'm sure you'd also agree that if you've ever been to a tropical forest, it doesn't look anything like the textbooks tell you. So the training is then in the habitats that we want to conserve, so it's very practical. And we take people in these forests for a month, for a whole month, for this immersive experience. And for many people, this is the first time they have asked those questions that you want to answer, and they have taken those risks. So it gives people this independence and confidence that, again, you can't get from a classroom. So we've been running courses, in fact, all over Africa. I just showed you these two places here. These are two lecture rooms that we've built, the first in Madagascar and the next one in Tanzania. So we've been supporting these infrastructure. And of course, everything we do is in partnership with our African colleagues, universities, NGOs, and government. And you'll see the lecture room here is very tailor-made. It's fully air-conditioned. And there's even a butterfly net there, should you need to go out and catch one. But it's not snake-proof. But another important reason to run these training courses in the places we want to conserve is that that's where the conservation's happening. So on our courses, we take people to local conservation projects so people can learn about conservation on the ground, what works and what doesn't work. And of course, conservation is collaborative. So on our courses, on the field courses, we give half of the place to students from Africa, from throughout Africa, and half from the rest of the world. So it's kind of like a mini United Nations in one spot. So sometimes we have up to 24 countries on each course. So this gives people a really important chance to learn from each other, but also it's about collaboration and working together from the outset. Nobody's an expert, everybody's learning together. And we also invite teachers from around the world. Conservation is multidisciplinary. So we're able to bring people in who are doing really interesting work in conservation, in tropical research. So the people coming on the courses are often learning new things for the first time. But I think capacity building plays a really useful role in building bridges between research, cutting-edge research, and conservation, between conservation and politics. And that's something that we've found that our tailor-made training courses have been playing quite a useful role. And I'll just give one example. So this is a toolkit called about measuring and monitoring ecosystem services. So those services that provide us with those benefits I was telling you earlier. And the toolkit was designed by a collaboration of organizations and people from the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, and it included academics from Cambridge University and other universities, as well as from NGOs. So it's this sort of best practice in how to measure ecosystem services. And what our role was to translate this onto the ground, so that the managers who need to use this tool can actually use it for themselves. So the picture here is a training course that we held with BirdLife International, and after this training course, this toolkit kind of went viral, and it was applied in 10 different places, 6 different African countries, and the results are still being used. But are we really having an impact? So we know that there's this amazing potential amongst African biologists with the passion and enthusiasm you can see here. But are we having an impact? So we've trained 2,000 alumni so far. And because we actually have a really good contact rate, it's 98%, we can see where they're going. So we can see that 95% are still in conservation in one way or another. Might be working in conservation practice, they might be working in conservation research. So these are results of our African alumni that we've been training. And just to give you 2 examples, Lily from Madagascar is now director of one of Madagascar's biggest national-led, Malagasy-led NGOs. And he's training others in his NGO. And he says, he really is a leader in conservation in Madagascar. There's also a nice story because he rediscovered this rather nice-looking duck that everybody thought was extinct. And so he really spearheaded a conservation program that's now saved the species from extinction with a bunch of other people. So that was a really nice, he was our first Malagasy who'd come on a TBA course. Many of our alumni are working in policy and are working in government. And we heard from Professor Leakey the importance of working with these decision makers. And so several of our alumni have gone to work in their ministries for the environment. And I know how tough that is. And so perhaps you could give them some advice on how to survive in those difficult places. But at least there are people there who are passionate about conservation and development working together, and they're working in the government. Well, we may have only trained 2,000 people, but there is a multiplier effect, because we now have 15 alumni groups across Africa. And what's amazing about these groups is they set themselves up. So we didn't start them. They actually set themselves up after their courses because they said, as the Sierra Leonean one said, that they want to address this shortfall of people in their own countries. So they're training others now. And there's actually an African-wide alumnus group that held the first ever African student-led conference on conservation. And the first one was actually held in Kenya in the Louis Leakey Memorial Hall. And so this was a way of getting other students to come together, share their ideas from across Africa. So I'm quite hopeful about these endangered species. Sylvain from Madagascar, who came on a few of our courses, is now doing her PhD on the blue-eyed black lemur, and this is her with some school children working in their habitats. Gilbert from Ghana set up his own NGO after the TBA course, and it's called Save the Frogs Ghana. And if anyone can save the frogs in Ghana, it's Gilbert and his colleagues. And what about the bats and the importance of them? Well, I'll hand you over to Iroro because she can tell you about what's happening in bat conservation in Africa. Iroro, over to you.
Thanks very much, Rosie. That was a very high-note speech there. I just wanted to know, how many of you have been to Nigeria here? Awesome. If you have been, and if you're planning to, or at some point I hope you get the chance to, you'll probably notice that it's a very diverse landscape. And as Rosie pointed out, to be able to conserve these landscapes, including diversity that lives in it, we need capacity building. And that's why I really like this forum, because this is all about capacity building, right? essentially, this is why I am very pleased and very appreciative to the organizers of the Cambridge Africa Day for letting me be here and to share my experience about how TBA has, as Rosie pointed out through several talks, through several alumni like myself, have encouraged and really helped me to launch my career in bat research. And so my talk is really about how TBA inspired me and how I have learned skills and how I've applied those skills and how I'm also passing on those skills. I will very easily and very quickly say that I believe I have a long interest in nature, but not all of it was fully formed. And in fact, I can recall from my very early days that one of the very first experiences I recall from my school days was in kindergarten, where we had to plant a bean seed and water it for several days. So I think I do claim to have a long-standing interest in nature. And I have been obviously raised in Nigeria in a very small town, as you can see on that map there, which is where Nigeria sits. I've been raised in a small town where I've very easily sort of gotten into watching nature documentaries on National Geographic and various other channels. But it wasn't quite the case that conservation was considered a career. Neither was it even considered lucrative at all. And so I kind of just continued going to school and studied environmental science, and it didn't quite trigger something in me until I met these amazing lecturers who always emphasized the usefulness of meaningful research. But more importantly, this TBA alumni here, alumnus here, Oyomare, told me about her amazing TBA experience, and very quickly I realized that my fate with biodiversity was sealed, whether or not society was interested in it. And so I guess that's why I like to always draw the analogy about how magical my TBA experience was, because indeed, it was like a fairy tale. I did kiss a frog. But unlike the fairy tale, I did not find a prince, but I found an amazing and growing career in biodiversity conservation, and this is really just what it is all about, and I'm gonna go into everything that I've learned. And it's not just about kissing the frog, but I went on to kiss several bats, and I have continued studying bats until now. The key thing about TBA courses, as Rosie pointed out, is, there's several types of projects, and there's huge diversity in everything that you can study in there. And you sit in one class, and it goes on from class to class, and you're really thrilled by the lectures that come forth. But I guess sitting in several of those lectures, I kept getting inspired, one talk at a time. And just about when I thought I couldn't possibly get more inspired, I heard a talk from one of the TBA teachers here, pictured Yeti, which was describing an extraordinary, at least in my hearing, a project where her PhD student will climb up into the rainforest canopy in Côte d'Ivoire. And obviously, this is on the West African coast. And he would spend several nights, sometimes 2 or 3 nights in a row, and he would just be there recording and measuring flower scent in order to determine what bat species were pollinating what tree species in the forest canopy. And that just took me away. It really just blew my mind and just put on a light bulb. And I quickly, very immediately realized that interesting, exciting research, this sort that you find only on National Geographic channels, was possible on African soil. For the first time in my life, I was realizing this, and it just took me away. And that's how I obviously went on dreaming about bats. And as soon as I returned to Nigeria, I was surprised and disappointed that there wasn't a single bat research going on in the country. I mean, there had been a couple of collections in the past by foreigners and a couple of PhD students, but they were mostly studying available bat colonies in urban areas, and no one was going in the forest, no one was going in the caves, no one was going in the mountains. I was disappointed, and in a country of over 170 million people with over 100 universities, not a single bat research lab. That really got to me, and so that's why I kind of just started looking for opportunities, and I very immediately turned to my TBA, brand new network, to get the experience that I need. And obviously, talked to Yeti, who had inspired me with our talk, and she helped me get my first research grant, and that's kind of how I've built on and on, going into inviting more colleagues to get into bat research in the country, and that's how I sort of started building up. But let's not forget, this is against the backdrop of widespread lack of interest in Nigeria on conservation, in a sense, especially political will, and general just misconceptions about what conservation really is. And for my poor parents, it was just hard for them to accept that I was turning into a forest woman than getting into, like a fancy paid oil and gas position. In fact, I recall that several times I had several exchanges with my dad, who felt I should introduce myself as an environmental scientist rather than a conservationist. But I said, well, who would understand the term conservationist if I never use it? So I kept saying, I am a conservationist, I'm sorry. Essentially, the key point I'm trying to make here is conservation was considered a Western endeavor. It wasn't something for Africans, and certainly not an African girl. But why bats, you would ask? Why should we care? Well, perhaps you probably know that bats are cute, and I hope you do realize this. But beyond that, bats make up 1/3 of the mammals on planet Earth, and some islands only have bats as their mammals. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but I'm just going to let that sit with you for a second. In addition to all of this wonderful thing about bats, they provide many ecosystem services, including pollination, seed dispersal, and maintaining insect pest populations. But they're also under threat, like so many biodiversity, as you probably know, including habitat loss. And particularly in West and Central Africa, the huge concern is with bat hunting for food, and sometimes for medicine, but mostly for food. But it's huge and it's intense, and it's a big challenge at this moment. Well, if you know Nigeria, as I've already kind of tried to draw you into the country, you probably know that we sit within this map shows, we sit kind of within the largest African bat biodiversity hotspot. And this is what we share with Cameroon. Right, that red circle there sort of highlights the largest bat African biodiversity hotspot sits between Nigeria and Cameroon. But it kind of makes you wonder, there is a biodiversity hotspot, but we don't know what's happening with Nigerian bats. So where do we go from here? And that's kind of how, having pulled in so many colleagues and friends, and also starting to raise students, we've now formed what is now the Nigerian Bat Project, and we've tried to improve our level of information by conducting lots of intensive surveys and doing conservation by talking to school kids and talking to government people. And essentially, we're really trying to prioritize capacity building, obviously having learned from TBA and lots of the experiences that I have gained over the years. Essentially, these are some of my students that I also train. Well, what we're really pleased about here is the fact that some of our baby steps, this is just going from 2010 when I went on the TBA course and haven't started my bat research in 2011. This is now about 6 years. And in these past 6 years, we have started the first acoustic library for Nigeria. If you're doing bird or bat work, you would realize the critical need for acoustic library. And we've also started a database of Nigerian bat records, and this is coming from an internship that TBA also supported me to do at the Harrison Institute here in the UK, in Kent. And that has then advanced into what we now have as the revised checklist of Nigerian bats. And this is coming from 30 years after the most recent one, which was done by Happold, David Happold, in his Mammals of Nigeria. So nothing really specific for bats, but now we're bringing it to fore. And in addition to that, from our work, we've added at least seven new records to the country's bat fauna, and this is just what we know as new records. There's a couple others that we have to confirm and even decide if they're cryptic species or even new species at that. Right. Right, so to support this Nigerian BAT project, we realized that, as lots of speakers have been mentioning, the critical need for institutions, and so I have managed to encourage my university leadership to upgrade our museum into a proper biodiversity research facility. And to sort of cover the conservation end of things, my colleague and I, pictured here, we've just launched a small NGO, small mammal conservation organization, to harness everything you have to do with conservation in bats and also other mammals. And we're hoping that this will have local relevance in addition to regional impact. But you see, it's not just about what's happening in Nigeria, it's also about what's happening in Africa. And Nigeria really does mirror what's happening in the rest of Africa. And so I feel like my TBA experience with networking, with working with people from multicultural settings, kind of came to bear when in 2013 I was invited to join, to attend the first African Bat Summit organized by Bat Conservation International. And in that summit, we got together colleagues from 19 African countries, and in fact, countries elsewhere where there were bat networks in the UK, from the US, Australia and co, and also in Europe. We got together and sat down and launched what is now Bat Conservation Africa, and that's all of the attendees at that summit. But essentially, my skills, the skills that I've attained from the TBA, helped me to become elected as the first co-chair of this very important network. And so we sort of very immediately launched into our priorities, and our top priority for BCA was capacity building. You're not surprised, right? So we started planning and tried to get funding from lots of people across the world, and in 2016, this year, we got lucky, and so we put up the first Bat Conservation Africa training workshop in Durban, South Africa, just following the International Bat Research Conference. And it was fantastic because we had students learning skills for the first time to be able to go out and do bat research. And these were students from across Africa, 12 countries, I beg your pardon, represented in that conference, in that workshop. And that also obviously led to peer-to-peer mentoring and learning from teachers. What have I learned? There's curiosity, and people will listen to you if you speak up to them. In fact, the local government will also listen, and you will be surprised how much impact that comes up to. Right, so I'll very quickly end with this. The future of science will be driven by diversity, so don't give up on your Africanness, said David Jacobs. And our dear Vice Chancellor of the University of Cambridge at the next ISTIN forum said this. He said, our aspirations should be much higher. They should revolve around a new generation of African scientists working on African solutions to some of Africa's most pressing needs. I'll let that sit with you for a second. I guess to kind of wrap it up is this. TBA's strategy is simple. Get extraordinary teachers from across the world, Africa and everywhere else, to inspire and embolden young African students to go ahead and provide African solutions that will not just influence Africa and affect Africa, but would, in many ways, change the world. Thank you very much.